Hello, thank you for joining. And today's conference on true faith is going to be a brief talk about the angels. It is Catholic doctrine that there are purely spiritual creatures. And St. Thomas Aquinas says that for the perfection of the universe, there are required creatures that are purely spiritual. So there are these creatures that exist that are bodiless and that are purely constituted of spirit and no matter, no material form. So what is an angel? So we get to the nature of the angels, and then I'll talk about a bit about the life of the angels, and I suppose the story of the angelic beings. So basically, what they are is we've just said. So they're a spirit, and that constitutes two main faculties. So it's intelligence and will. They are distinct from the divine being, which is also purely spirit, in that, of course, they are creatures, and also that their being is not the same as their existence. Okay, so you have the existence of the angel, and then you have the essence of the angel, which are in fact distinct things. The fact that he exists isn't one and the same reality as the fact that he has being. That's one of the things that the theologians distinguish between God and an angel, and they also say that what differentiates one angel from another is not the same principle as in humans. The main individuating thing in human beings being the corporeal part, the form, or the matter, basically. With angels who are pure form, he says it's required that they have, if we are to make sense of the angels, that they are in fact entirely separate species. So each angel is his own species. So that there would be as much distinction between one angel and another brother angel as there is between, say, a fly and an elephant. There is that much distinction between the angels. So their personalities are very sharp, very different, and there's a lot of variety and a lot of different forms of beauty in angels. Now, when we consider angels, we cannot help but thinking of them in a human way, and because all of our knowledge comes through our senses, which require, your mind processes the data, which comes, for example, through the eyes, and then it makes an intellectual sense of it and gives us a certain new existence in the mind. But it's only through those mental images that we deduce things. By the process of abstraction, we get the sense out of it, and so that means that if we were to see an angel, for example, it would usually be them condescending to us by showing something corporeal. Now, it's often a youth who's very beautiful and he has wings. So that means that the wings are symbolic. He's from above, and it's sort of it's a kind of a way of saying he's superior to man, like there's something higher than him. He's above man by his nature. Okay, so and we'll get on to that. But really, what's happening there is that the angel is merely acting on our sense perceptions. He's not really showing us what he really is. So let's just get rid of this idea that they really are these floating bodies, or they're these chubby little cute infants with wings and all of that, which you see in Christian art and all of that sort of thing. They are not really that in themselves. They don't essentially have this body or all the stuff that goes with it, the things that go with it. It's a little bit like a man getting into a car and using the car as a means of achieving something, but he's totally disconnected from the car, and he's not that at all. That's not part of him at all. So the angel is entirely spiritual. He is entirely personal. That is, he's a hypostasis, so he is a person. He's an individual substance of a rational nature, and he is very individual in the sense that he is one of a kind, one species. So we call them all angels because what they have in common is that they are purely spiritual, and they don't have bodies, and therefore they operate in a different way to human beings. They are the creatures, and they are spiritual. They are not bodily in any way. So getting back to St. Thomas's quote, there are, for the perfection of the universe, there are both, there is obviously the divine being. Then after that, there are, in the order of creatures, you have first the the immaterial world. Okay, so that is the world of the angels, and that would include blessed and fallen angels. So you have the rational creatures, and they were said to have come about in the Imprian heaven. But okay, so we have a certain spiritual reality, spiritual creatures. Then we have creatures that are part material and part spiritual, and ones that and that would include, in fact, the animals. Okay, but you have man who has he's rational and he's material. So with man, you have a soul that is able to think and to love to love the supreme good and love good in general, and love the honest good and love the spiritual good. So he is able to think, and therefore it follows that he is able to love God, although there's a great disproportion between the human and the divine. However, with the help of grace, he is able also to share in the reward that the angels have, who also, like man, have been tested. But I'm just getting back to the perfection of the universe. So we have also creatures that are entirely material, stones, for example. And then you have all the creatures that have a soul of some kind. So you even have the vegetative soul, then you have the animal soul, and then you finally have the human soul. And then ultimately we get right out of the world of matter, and then we have the angel. And then after we have the angel, we have, of course, the divine being. But of course, there is the hypostatic union, which is altogether unique again. And we have the privileges of the Immaculate Virgin, the mother of God. But in the order of nature, it goes God, angel, man, animal, beast, those kind of things, and then like fishes, then plants, then stones, and then you have like the elements that make up, you have the sky, the water, and the air, and all of that. So that is sort of the spectrum that we're looking at. You can see that there's ascending scale of perfection in nature, and finally we get up to the entirely spiritual creature, which is what we're talking about. So the angels, it is believed that they were produced or created, perhaps either, well, in a sense they were before man, because they would have to have been, if we are to take Genesis as the truth, in that there was the universe created, and by universe, St. Thomas really means all that exists. It doesn't just mean the physical material universe like we often understand when we open up a science book and see the stars and the earth. The universe is all creatures, all of creation. Okay, so anyway, it seems as though the angel was produced before man was produced anyway, which is the point. And they were not yet in the state of beatitude, beatitude being the beatific vision, which none have a predetermined right to have. It's a free gift, but God requires that the rational creature use his functions of rationality and will to submit, to do his will, and thus to be rewarded. It's in the nature of a creature of God who is responsible to be able to do what is required of him before he is rewarded, because he's a rational creature. So it is not like a dog who's given a biscuit and he'll instantly go for it and then you reward him and pat him on the head. It's more he decides, and a hungry dog would have no choice but to go for the food, whereas a rational creature, although God is infinitely good, before he reveals himself fully to that creature, he can give it a test. He can say, look, this is who I am, this is what I want of you, are you willing to submit to me? And he's not simply just showing the reward and forcing the person to will good. He is telling him that he is who he is and he wants certain things done, and it is the duty of the rational creature not to make a mistake, but to follow and to trust the higher good and to submit. So there was therefore a test of the angels, because we know this, since it is of faith that there are also fallen angels. As to how many have fallen, St. Thomas Aquinas wisely observes that there would have been less rather than more. With men, we're not too sure about that, but with angels, less rather than more, because it is a less natural thing for the angel to make a mistake. And usually mistakes in nature happen rarely rather than all the time, or rather than more often. For example, a miscarriage of a baby. That's not something that regularly happens, or happens more often than not. And so he's saying, in a sense, it's an unnatural for something as beautiful and perfect as an angel to make a mistake, because his knowledge is infused in his creation, so he has it all there. It's not because he was ignorant. It was because of a mistake that he made through bad will. Okay, and again, it's not in the nature of the angel to make a mistake, and in fact, in the sphere of nature, because of the infused knowledge, he cannot make any mistake in the sphere of nature. However, when it comes to the sphere of grace and the divine, the angel can possibly make a mistake. So, for example, he was called to the supernatural life. However, the angel was created very, very good and very perfect in his natural state. And to step up to that supernatural requires, again, the use of grace. So he had to actually make use of something that was higher than his nature. And if he decides to reject the supernatural and remain in his natural state, then he has resisted the invitation and the command to the supernatural with the help of grace. And here is where Our Lady is actually called the Queen of Angels also, because she's the channel of all graces, and it is, I believe it's taught that the grace was also something that the angels had to make use of through the abundant grace that God gave through Christ, although I need to check that. But they had a certain grace anyway, and they were free to reject that, and we know that some of them did. And what happens is that some believe the test consisted of a representation to the angels of the Blessed Virgin carrying our Lord, and that was basically the hypostatic union. And the angel would have seen that this nature is human, but it's being raised above ours, and we need to adore and respect God in the form of a human. Why didn't he adopt an angelic nature? He chose something lower and then raised it above us, and still wants us to adore and submit him in that form, which we see as a lot lower than ours. And his mother will therefore also have authority over us as queen. So she'll be the Queen of Angels, and that's according to one interpretation from Apocalypse. There was the war in heaven, and there was the woman and the moon under her feet, and the man-child, and all of this. And some of the angels couldn't cope with it, and the reason also some of them may have fallen is that there was a certain bad example. They were influenced by a very great angel, who was the light bearer, Lucifer, who made his decision not to follow God. And some believe that it was, in a sense, that's how this war in heaven was fought, is that one of the great lights of heaven decided to go against God, and others were attracted and inspired to do the same. And then we have Michael, on the other hand, who was another angel who was very upright and just, and certainly didn't sin, but submitted to God, and went around saying, "But who is like to God?" Because the cry from Lucifer was, "I will be like the Most High," and he knew that wasn't possible in a literal sense, but he meant that he wanted the rational creature's greatest good, which is likeness to God, through his own nature and not through submission to the divine will. And therefore we have Michael holding up the banner of justice and being followed by the good angels, and on the other hand, Lucifer dragging down, according to St. John, a third, is what we can deduce. He said a third of the stars of heaven. So basically it probably means about a third of the angels went down, not only because they made that decision, but also the scandal of Lucifer. And then it's asked as well, how long would it have taken them to make that decision? And we can answer this by an analogy, in that it would have been equivalent to the longest human life. So that means like maybe 900 years of intense activity, but mental activity, of the quality of life and the amount of interior acts that you would make in about 900 years would have been about equivalent to what an angel would have gone through when he made up his mind whether or not to follow God. So we've talked about the fall, we've covered some of the nature of the angel. I want to go into a few more things about how they work. The angel, he can communicate with other spirits simply by the movement of his will, and he can let another angel know that he wants to communicate something, and the other angel is free therefore to listen, and there's a certain intellectual communication that takes place, a little bit like when you do body language to somebody, they get the message. But with angels, obviously, there's no body involved, but there's another kind of form of communication which comes when one wills to communicate something, and then they communicate it, and we can have a certain communication with the angels in a similar way, and they can modify and help our existence on earth if we are attentive to them, if we make some contact and communication with angels. And it's one of the highest natural goods to be able to speak to an angel, like if we were able to communicate with them in the heaven that they were in before the beatific vision, the heaven of, they call it the Caelum Sancti Trinitatis, the heaven of the Trinity, of the Blessed Trinity. They are different in that they obviously that they work in spirit fashion. They do not work through material means, and they have a duration measure of their own. They never go back on decisions once taken. Hence, there's no redemption of angels, and it's due to their nature. And there is also the fact that they are yes, they have this infused knowledge, so there's no learning, but they are always in act. So our mind sometimes, for example, when we're asleep, it's not in act. So it's in potency. It is disposed to action. But the angel is always in action, always acting, in the sense that he's fully active all the time. There's no being slowed down or impeded. So in that way, there's a plus. They're also more like God by nature, although a human being could be closer to God through grace and holiness. So they are superior in nature. They are always in act. They modify our existence, whether they be blessed or fallen. The demons are allowed to tempt to a certain measure, but they are never commanded to do so. So that God allows a certain amount of the demonic activity in the world, and in the end, it's actually for our greater good that we may triumph over it and exercise virtue. So that's basically to wrap this up. I would just say that be aware of these very powerful beings. They're extremely influential, although we do not see them. They are a bit like the sun on the earth. If we didn't have the good angels there would be utter darkness, and the earth wouldn't be able to continue for much longer. That's how profoundly modifying this life is with these great spiritual powers that are out there. Now, there's many more things that need to be covered on the angels, but that's an introduction to the angelic beings.